Okay, so the seeding script is ready, and now we are ready to create several books via using the references to the associated classes that will obviously populate all the referenced tables. And at the end, we add all the records into the context and save the changes. So now, let's run it. Except, how do we run it? Well, we simply call the seed data context method we just created at the application startup from the configure method. So let's go to the startup class, and here we can remove the hello world because we don't really want it. We want to replace it with our seeding method instead. So I'm not gonna delete it, I'm just gonna comment it out, but we don't need it at all. What we do need is the access to the context first. To do that, we'll simply pass it into the method as an argument. So we add another argument, and it's going to be the book db context, and I'll call it context. So now we have access to the context, and we can call the seed method. So here I will simply do context dot, and I'll make the call to seed data context. Remember, that's a static method, so we don't have to instantiate any object here. So let's build the app first. Let's make sure that there's no errors in any of our scripts. And I got a one successful build, so as you can see. So now let's run the app. And you can run the app by clicking the green play button for the IIS Express, but that will start the app in debug mode. And I currently don't want to debug anything, so I'll simply run it without the debug mode by pressing Ctrl and holding it down and pressing F5 with it. So the app runs, but you don't really see anything on the page because we didn't send anything to the page. Basically, you see that the localhost cannot be found. But what happened was that we actually ran the method and sent everything to the database because the app actually started, so it triggered the method. So let's have a look in the database. I'll close the browser, we don't need that anymore. So let's go to our tables, I'll refresh them, right click and refresh. And let's see the first one, which is authors, right click and view data. And here's the data. We have Jack London from country 5, which I remember was USA. So let's go to country, view data, and country with ID 5 is indeed USA. Country Germany is with ID 4, so if you go back to authors, we see the country 4 is for Carl May, which is correct. That's the Germany. So this is linked correctly. Now let's see at books, view data for the books. It's just a bunch of information about ISBN, title, and date published. But if you go to book authors and view data there, you can see we have the book ID and author ID each linked together. And at this point it may seem like you have book ID 1, author ID 1, 2 and 2 and so forth, but it's because we just created all the records all at once. So basically that's how they proceeded by being created in the database. But actually look at book ID 5 has the author ID 4. Let's have a look at book ID 5, which is Three Musketeers, and author ID 4 is Alexander Dumas, so that is correctly linked. Now let's see at categories. We have view data and we have a bunch of categories here, but if we go to book categories table, again we have the categories and book linked together. So for example, let's see book ID 5 is there twice, as you can see, because it has two categories. It has a category 3 and 4. So the category 3 and 4 are history and action. So it's for the book 5. Let's go to book 5, and that is the Three Musketeers, which indeed was the history and action categories. So let's look at the reviews, and the reviews contain the information for each of the reviews, but it also has a link to reviewer ID and book ID. So for example, the first one has a book ID 3, and that is a review for Winnetou. So let's see if book ID 3 is indeed Winnetou, and yes it is. You can see that this is book ID 3. So finally reviewers, and it's just a list of names with IDs. So our database is ready, it has been seeded, but if we run the application again, the script would run again and try to populate the database with the same data. So we don't want to do that, so what I'm going to do is comment out the call to the seed method at the startup. So I'll go to the startup class, and I will comment this out so the seed data context will not run anymore. It simply stays there for you to use if you want to modify it, but we don't want to run it again. We will want to populate the database with our own data using the API calls, of course. And as you can see, I made a little mistake. All of my tables are in plurals, like authors, books, reviews, etc., except country. And that's because in my DB set, I created a country DB set instead of countries. So let's go back to the bookDB context. And here, I'll simply rename country to countries. So that will create the DB set for countries. And now I'll go back to my tables. I'll right click country, rename, and change it to countries. It will start the script to update the table, and I will update the database. And now we have our countries. If I go and view data, all the data is still there. So this was just easier than going through migrations again. So all our tables are now correct. So everything is moving along nicely so far, and we are finally ready to start working on the actual APIs. But, yes, there is a but, before we do that, we need to have a clear picture of what we will be needing. So let's review that next.